Good evening. Tonight, let the world slow down for a while. You're safe here, with a quiet story from the edge of history. A story soft enough to fall asleep to. If you've ever wondered why entire villages once vanished from the English countryside, stay with me. We'll drift through time together, with nothing to do but listen, breathe, and rest. Before we begin, from which country are you listening tonight? What time is it there? I always find it comforting to imagine how far these quiet stories travel. Before we wander further, if you enjoy calm tales like this one, you can press like and subscribe. Not now, just when sleep finally takes over. For now, let the warmth of your blanket and the soft sound of the crackling fire keep you company. Close your eyes if you wish. Picture a cool evening where the light has just started to fade. The English hills stretch out, wide and slow. There's no sound but the rustle of wind through tall grass, and perhaps the faint song of an owl somewhere unseen. The air smells of damp earth and the memory of rain. You walk along a narrow path between low mounds of earth. At first, they seem natural, just part of the land. But look closer, and you'll notice the faint lines of something once built here. The remains of homes. The ghostly shapes of a village lost to time. A place that once held laughter, warmth, and life. The sun slips lower, and a golden haze softens everything. It's peaceful now, so deeply calm that even the past feels like it's fallen asleep. And yet, beneath the stillness, there's a quiet echo of what once was. You can almost hear its distant footsteps, the rhythm of work, and the soft hum of people living their everyday lives. Take a slow breath. Let that image settle in your mind. These are the great plague villages of England. Centuries ago, they were alive, filled with small joys and simple routines. And then, suddenly, they were gone, abandoned, lost to time and silence. The story we're visiting tonight isn't one of fire, it's a story of how life can shift, how quiet can follow noise, and how nature gently takes back what people once built. There's no rush here, just soft footsteps through history, and the comfort of knowing that every ending has its own kind of peace. As you listen, let your thoughts wander like the wind through empty fields. Imagine the sound of the fire nearby, steady and gentle, wrapping the room in warmth. The world outside fades away, and you're left with this, just the voice of history, speaking slowly like the rhythm of a calm heart. In moments like this, time seems to stretch. It doesn't matter what century it is, or where you are. The story becomes a kind of bridge, carrying you across the quiet waters of sleep. You don't have to follow every word. You can let the sentences drift by, like leaves on an evening stream. Every few moments, remember to breathe softly. Let your shoulders sink. You're safe here, and the story will hold you for a while. The fields of England are vast, and tonight they belong to you. The night deepens, the wind cools, and the ruins wait, patient as always. The moon rises slowly over the fields, casting a silver light across the uneven ground. The outlines of old walls and pathways appear faintly beneath the glow. Somewhere, a fox slips between the shadows, as if it remembers a path that no longer exists. Everything feels ancient, and yet somehow alive. The air cools, carrying the scent of grass and forgotten soil. You imagine what it must have been like, long ago, when smoke drifted from chimneys and laughter echoed across these hills. The night would have been darker then, the stars brighter, and every sound sharper in the quiet air. Each ruin tells a story. A piece of stone might once have been part of a hearth. A hollow in the ground might have held a well where hands once drew water. Every mark, every curve, carries the touch of those who came before. You can almost sense their daily rhythm woven into the land itself. Over time, people moved away, and silence grew roots here. The fields that once gave harvests now bloom only with wildflowers. Birds nest in the corners of fallen cottages, and the seasons come and go without hurry. The land has accepted its solitude. There's something strangely comforting in that thought that even when life leaves, the earth finds balance again. The soil rests, the wind hums its old tune, the sky keeps watch, patient and calm. Nothing is wasted, nothing truly gone, only changed. If you listen closely, you can hear the language of stillness, the gentle sound of wind moving through long grass, the soft creak of a tree bending, the distant ripple of water over stones. Nature continues its quiet work, just as it always has. As the night deepens, you realize how easy it is to forget the world's noise. Here, time slows until it almost disappears. The ruins, the hills, and the stars exist together in the same silence. And for a moment, so do you. Every few minutes, remind yourself it's all right to drift away. The story will keep going, even if your thoughts grow faint. The purpose of this moment isn't to remember, but to rest. To let go of the day, the noise, and the need to stay awake. Soon, even the image of the fields begins to fade. The details soften, the grass becomes mist, the hills dissolve into shadows, and the ruins sink gently into sleep. What remains is peace. Soft, unbroken peace. And as the final sparks of the fire grow dim, the night folds itself around you like a blanket. The world becomes still again, just as it was centuries ago, when the last footsteps left the village behind. Somewhere far away, dawn waits patiently, but for now, it's enough to rest and breathe and let the quiet carry you home. Before the quiet, there was life. The kind of life that moved slowly, carried by the rhythm of the seasons. Imagine the soft sound of footsteps on packed earth, the creak of wooden carts, and the low murmur of voices at dusk. These were villages filled with warmth, not grand or wealthy, but alive in the simplest, most human ways. The sun would rise over rolling hills, painting the thatched rooftops with golden light. Farmers stepped out early, their breath visible in the morning chill. The smell of freshly turned soil mixed with the smoke of breakfast fires. Chickens wandered freely, and the day began without hurry, just as it always did. In these villages, everyone knew one another. A neighbour's voice could be heard across the hedgerows. Children played in the lanes, chasing each other between cottages. The rhythm of work and rest was predictable, comforting in its repetition. There was no rush to escape, no thought that the world would ever change. As the day moved on, the fields filled with sound, the clink of metal against stone, the steady breath of animals pulling ploughs, and the laughter of people working side by side. Every movement felt like part of a shared purpose. Evenings were quieter, families gathered near the hearth, sharing stories that had been told 100 times before. Take a slow breath. Let yourself imagine that warmth, the dim light of fire against wooden walls, the scent of straw and baked bread. A world built on small kindnesses and simple routines. There was something peaceful about it, something steady and sure. These villages didn't just exist on maps. They were worlds of memory and muscle. The way a path curved toward the mill, the sound of water turning the wheel, the small details that made up a life. People found comfort not in wealth or power, but in knowing exactly where they belonged. Every so often, let the thought settle how many lives have been lived quietly, without ever being written down. These places remind us that history isn't always grand. Sometimes it's made of hands working the soil, or voices singing softly while the day fades. As the evening deepened, oil lamps flickered in every window. From a distance, the villagers glowed like small constellations on the earth. Inside, conversations slowed, and the tired found rest. The world outside went dark, but the warmth within stayed bright. You can almost hear it's a faint hum of a village preparing for sleep. The crackle of the last piece of wood on the fire. The sound of wind against the walls. It's a gentle reminder that peace often comes in ordinary moments, in nights just like this one. And as you picture that scene, let your breathing match its rhythm. Slow, steady, calm. The night stretches long, and the story drifts with it, moving softly toward the next chapter, toward the moment when this quiet world begins to change. Morning returns again, just as it always did. The same golden light touches the same rooftops, the same doors open, and the same paths are walked. It's easy to believe that life here would last forever, that nothing could disturb the gentle rhythm of days built on habit and hope. The marketplace was the heart of it all. A few stalls, a few baskets of grain or wool, maybe honey from a nearby farm. There wasn't much, but there was always enough. People traded smiles as much as goods, and gossip carried further than the wind. The air was full of the scent of hay, the sweetness of apples, and the steady hum of work. Nearby, the mill turned lazily with the stream, the water wheel creaking like an old friend. The sound never stopped completely. It was the pulse of the village, a reminder that the world kept moving even when people rested. That kind of rhythm made time feel circular, almost endless. In the evenings, children would gather near the fading embers, listening to the quiet talk of the elders. They spoke not of faraway lands, but of rain, harvest, and the coming frost. Ordinary things, but they carried a weight that felt timeless. The kind of stories that made sleep come easily. Take a moment, let that image rest in your mind, a place where everyone's purpose felt clear, and no one hurried through life, where the soft thud of boots on earth was enough to mark the passing of a day. Even now, there's something deeply calming about imagining it. Every so often, the wind would change, bringing new sounds from the distance, perhaps the echo of travelers, or the faint call of a distant bell. But the people here rarely wondered much about the world beyond the hills. Home was enough, the fields were enough, and that was peace. Seasons passed in quiet repetition. Winter brought the glow of fires and the comfort of company. Spring returned the green to the hills and the laughter of work returning to the fields. There was a beauty in that cycle, in the way each ending led softly into the next beginning. If you listen closely, you might still hear the echo of those lives, the rhythm of footsteps, the rustle of wind through thatch, the laughter carried by rain. They are faint, but they linger, as if the land itself remembers. Take a slow breath again. The past feels close here, like a whisper. The fields of England hold more than grass, they hold memory. And tonight, you've walked among them, but soon the air will shift. Change will come quietly, like fog at dawn. The peaceful pattern will falter, replaced by something none of them could foresee. Yet for now, the world still sleeps beneath gentle stars, and all is calm. Let it stay that way, just a little longer, as the night deepens, and we drift with it. It began softly, almost unnoticed. A whisper carried by travelers, a story told in hushed tones at the edge of markets. No one believed it at first. How could something so small, so far away, ever reach their quiet corner of England? The fields still shimmered with morning dew, the days still followed their familiar rhythm, but change had already begun its slow approach. At first, the whispers spoke of sickness, strange fevers in distant towns, a shadow that followed traders along the roads. It was said to move swiftly, unseen, leaving fear in its wake. But such stories always seemed to belong elsewhere. The villagers listened, shook their heads, and returned to their work. After all, nothing had changed here. The bread still baked, the soil still turned beneath their hands. The days felt the same, but something subtle hung in the air. Fewer travelers passed along the lanes. The laughter in the marketplace grew quieter. People began to notice the absence of familiar faces. Merchants who once came every week, now nowhere to be found. It was as if the world beyond the hills had exhaled, and the silence lingered. Evening conversations grew shorter. The warmth of the hearth remained, but the mood around it shifted. The tone of voices carried a touch of unease. Someone would mention a rumor from the next town over, another would change the subject. They didn't want to believe that their steady, gentle life could be touched by something dark and unknown. Take a deep breath. Feel how that unease might have spread, not suddenly, but slowly, like a shadow lengthening at dusk. The village didn't yet know what was coming, only that something invisible was moving closer. The kind of stillness that feels heavy, like the air before a storm. Every so often, someone would glance at the road, half expecting to see travelers appear again. But the path stayed empty. Days turned to weeks, and the stillness deepened. Animals grew restless. The wind seemed colder. There was no proof of danger, only the growing sense that the world had changed, quietly and without asking permission. One evening, as the sun fell behind the hills, a traveler finally arrived, dust on his boots, eyes sunken from the road. He spoke softly, his voice thin with exhaustion. His story was simple, and it silenced the room. It reached the next town. The words hung in the air like smoke. No one spoke after that. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the slow creak of the door closing against the wind. In that moment, a new kind of quiet began, heavier, colder, and filled with questions no one could answer. As the night settled in, sleep came restlessly to the village. Dreams turned uneasy. Some swore they heard the wind carry strange echoes, like whispers from faraway streets. Others lay awake, listening for sounds that never came. The unknown had arrived, not yet visible, but impossible to ignore. And still, the world outside seemed the same. The moon rose, the fields swayed, life continued, just slightly, off rhythm, like a song played one note too slow. It was the beginning of something none of them could name, a story written not in words, but in silence. Morning came, but it felt different. The mist that usually lifted from the fields seemed to linger longer than usual, clinging to the ground as if unwilling to leave. People went about their routines, but slower now, each movement measured, each glance toward the road a little more anxious. Even the birds seemed quieter, their calls fading into the soft, uncertain air. The market day arrived with fewer stalls than before. Those who came brought smaller baskets, lighter loads. Conversations that once filled the air were replaced by short exchanges and quick nods. Hands brushed briefly, then retreated. Something invisible stood between everyone, and though no one could see it, they all felt it. Inside the cottages, families gathered more tightly. Fires were lit earlier, and windows closed sooner. Some said it was only the chill of the season, but deep down, they knew it was something else, something they couldn't quite name. A feeling that the wind itself carried stories they didn't want to hear. One evening, a cart passed through the village without stopping. Its driver kept his head down, eyes fixed on the road ahead. No one approached, no one waved. When the sound of its wheels finally faded into the distance, only the echo remained, rolling like a memory across the empty lane. Take a soft breath here. Imagine standing at the edge of that road, the cold air brushing against your face, the stillness wrapping around you. The world feels unchanged, and yet it isn't. Something has shifted, quietly and completely. That's how fear often arrives, not with noise, but with absence. Every few minutes, let that idea settle the difference between silence and stillness. One soothes, the other unsettles. The villagers were learning that difference without ever speaking it aloud. They carried it in their posture, in the way they looked at the horizon, in how their voices dropped to whispers when the night deepened. Soon, talk of illness began to pass between them in half sentences. A cousin in another town, a merchant who didn't return, a road said to be closed. They didn't yet say the word plague. They didn't need to. Fear had already taken its place at every table. The days shortened. The air grew heavier. Some began storing extra food. Others refused to travel at all. Even the church bell in the distant valley rang less often, as though sound itself had learned to hide. Everything that once marked the rhythm of their lives had begun to hesitate. And yet, amid that quiet worry, life continued in small ways. A mother kneaded dough. A boy fetched water. A farmer mended his gate, his hands moving by memory alone. The ordinary persisted, fragile and brave, against the slow encroachment of the unknown. As night returned, the village seemed to hold its breath. The sky stretched wide and empty, the stars distant and cold. Somewhere far away, a door creaked, and a dog barked once, then fell silent. The whisper of trouble had become something more, a feeling that wouldn't fade. And though no one could yet see its shape, everyone could sense that life, as they knew it, was about to change forever. It came quietly, without warning. There was no sound, no storm, no sign in the sky. Just one day, someone didn't open their door. The bread left at the window went untouched. The smoke from the chimney never rose. And though no one said the word aloud, everyone felt it settle in their chests like a weight. Something unseen had arrived. At first, they thought it might pass as simple fever, a few days of rest, and then recovery. But as the week went on, more windows stayed shuttered, more fires went cold. The familiar sounds of the village, the laughter, the footsteps, the calling of names grew quieter, until silence began to fill the spaces between the houses. Neighbors left small bundles of food at the edges of paths, whispering prayers for safety as they retreated. People began to mark their doors with chalk, small signs of warning or hope, depending on who you asked. No one lingered outside for long anymore. The air felt heavy, the kind of heavy that makes you listen too closely to every sound. Inside the cottages, time moved differently. Families stayed together, speaking softly, afraid of what might come next. The firelight flickered over faces lined with worry. The world outside no longer felt safe, but neither did staying still. Every choice carried the same uncertainty. Take a slow breath here. The scene is quiet to quiet. Even the wind seems careful, brushing lightly through the grass, as if not to disturb the fear that now rests over the land. The villagers could feel it, though they couldn't see it. Something invisible, and yet everywhere. The first to fall were mourned from a distance. No one dared gather. Burials were quick, often done by those who stayed silent as they worked. The hills began to hold secrets, the kind that only the earth could keep. People spoke less each day, because words felt too fragile to hold back something so large. Every few minutes, let the rhythms slow. Imagine the way a day might pass when no one leaves their home, when the sound of footsteps becomes a memory. The air inside grows warm from the fire, but the silence beyond the walls feels endless. It's a kind of stillness that can't be escaped, only endured. And yet, in that stillness, there was also care. A neighbor leaving bread by a window. A voice calling softly from the path to ask if anyone needed help. Even fear could not erase compassion, it only made it quieter. Acts of kindness became whispers in the dark, small lights against a spreading shadow. Each morning, hope tried to return. People opened doors a little wider, stepped out just a few feet further. But by afternoon, someone would whisper another name, another loss, and the doors would close again. The rhythm of the village began to break apart, piece by piece, until nothing familiar remained. Night after night, the wind carried the same question, how long? But the answer never came. The stars looked down, unchanged, while below them, a village held its breath, caught between waiting and surrender. The plague had arrived, not with thunder, but with silence, and that silence was what frightened them most. Days began to blend together. The sun rose, but few noticed. The routines that once defined the village, the ringing of the mill, the chatter in the lanes, faded into memory. Each household became its own small world, bound by silence and the hope that the danger might somehow pass them by. Outside, the air hung still. The fields, once full of movement, now stood untouched. Tools lay where they had last been used, covered in dew and dust. It was as though time itself had stopped to listen, waiting for the sound of life to return. Inside, the fires burned low. Bread grew scarce. People spoke in whispers, their voices barely rising above the crackle of embers. There were moments when someone would hum softly, as if to keep fear away, a melody without words, fading before it could finish. Every so often, a faint knock echoed from one house to another, food left for a neighbor, a message of care in a time when closeness was too dangerous. Even in the shadow of loss, humanity lingered quietly, like the glow of a single candle in a long night. Take a slow, deep breath. Imagine the sound of wind against empty cottages, the rustle of branches brushing the walls. The world feels both vast and small, as though the village is suspended between life and memory. That's how history often feels distant, yet familiar, as if we've all stood in that same silence before. Each evening, the sky glowed red for a few brief minutes before fading to grey. The villagers watched from behind their windows, their faces pale in the dim light. Some prayed for strength, others simply waited. No one knew when it would end, only that each dawn seemed to bring fewer voices than before. Soon, the quiet became so deep that even the animals seemed to sense it. The dogs stopped barking, the birds stopped singing. Only the wind moved freely, carrying the faint scent of smoke and earth across the hills. The village was no longer a place of sound, it had become an echo of itself. Yet, in that stillness, there was also resilience. Some found comfort in the smallest tasks, mending a garment, tending the fire, watching the stars from a doorway. These moments, however small, reminded them that they were still here, that life, fragile as it was, persisted. Every few minutes, Let your mind soften, like the light over those hills. The story doesn't rush, and neither should you. These people didn't know they were becoming part of history. They were simply surviving, one quiet day at a time. And when the last light faded from the cottages, the village slept beneath a heavy sky. The fields rested, the air grew cold, and the night deepened into stillness. The plague had come and settled like a shadow across the land, but even in that darkness, there remained a quiet strength, the kind that waits patiently for morning. When fear finally took hold, the villagers did something both simple and profound. They closed their world. Paths that once connected friends and families were now empty. Gates stayed shut, doors bolted. A single cough in the distance could send a shiver through an entire street. Still, behind those closed doors, hearts beat quietly with the same hope that isolation might save them. Each home became its own small island. People spoke through walls, through cracks in windows, through soft voices at a distance. They left baskets of food at the edge of fences, sometimes marked with a cloth to signal safety. It was a strange kind of kindness, one that asked people to care by staying apart. In the beginning, it felt temporary. They told themselves that a few weeks of caution would be enough. The air outside seemed harmless. The sky looked the same. But as time stretched on, the silence deepened. Even the animals seemed to sense the unease. Dogs lingered by doors, waiting for voices that no longer came. Take a slow breath. Picture the inside of one of those cottages, the soft flicker of a small fire, the smell of bread growing faint, the sound of a kettle just beginning to cool. Every creak of the wooden floor sounds louder now. Every gust of wind outside feels closer. Isolation has its own kind of noise, a rhythm of waiting. People began to measure time differently. Days no longer followed work or market hours, but the light through a window or the number of loaves left on the shelf. When they spoke, their words carried more weight, not because of what they said, but because saying anything at all felt rare. Every so often, let your thoughts drift, the way theirs must have drifted, back to days of laughter in the fields, the scent of hay, the hum of the mill wheel. Memory became a companion. For some, it was comfort. For others, it was a reminder of how much the world had changed. The few who dared step outside walked carefully, keeping distance even from the shadows of others. The sound of a single footstep could echo through the lanes like a warning. Yet, in that fear, there was also courage, not the kind told in stories, but the quiet kind, the kind that endures without being seen. The villagers left coins in bowls of vinegar by the roadside, a crude attempt to cleanse what hands could not. Bread was exchanged with long sticks, letters placed beneath stones. They found new ways to survive, small rituals that became habits, then traditions. In every act of caution, there was also hope, and though no one said it aloud, everyone longed for the same sound, the familiar knock on a door, the laughter of neighbors, the comfort of normal life returning. But the days kept stretching, one into another, like a candle that refused to go out, yet never grew brighter. By nightfall, the fire burned low again. The world outside was silent, but inside, families sat together in the dim glow, whispering soft words of reassurance they only half believed. It was loneliness, wrapped in love, the kind of isolation that both hurt and healed. The next mornings came slower. Mist hung over the fields, heavy and unmoving. No one hurried anymore. There was nowhere to go. The rhythm of life had shrunk to the small sounds of survival, the scraping of spoons in bowls, the soft closing of doors, the crackle of wood. Silence had become the villagers' only language. Some people left messages on pieces of cloth tied to fences, a sign that they were safe, or sometimes a sign that they were not. A single scrap of fabric fluttering in the wind could tell more than words ever could. Those who saw it paused, bowed their heads, and walked on without speaking. As the days passed, the edges of fear softened into resignation. People began to accept the stillness, to live inside it as if it were a new kind of weather. They stopped asking when it would end. Instead, they learned to make peace with the waiting. Inside each home, the same small rituals repeated. A mother brushing ash from the hearth, a father repairing a chair that no one would sit on, a child tracing shapes in the dust. These moments were not grand, but they kept the thread of living intact, one quiet gesture at a time. Take a deep breath here. Imagine that small cottage again, the air still warm from the fire, the faint smell of bread and smoke. Outside, the wind whispers through the grass, and somewhere far away, a bird calls once before falling silent again. The world has narrowed to this: a single home, a family, a breath. Every few minutes, let your mind drift with theirs. Some villagers began to find comfort in the quiet, the sound of their own heartbeat, the simple act of watching sunlight move across the wall. Stillness, once frightening, became a kind of companion. There were moments of courage to quiet ones. A woman leaving food at the neighbor's step, a man tending to a sick friend though fear pressed against his chest. They did what they could, not out of hope for recognition, but out of the simple truth that compassion can survive even in fear. The seasons turned, though no one marked the days anymore. The snow melted, the grass grew long, and the air warmed again, but the village remained hushed. People had learned not to expect good news, only small mercies, a morning without coughing, a meal shared safely, the sight of a friend at a distance. By night, the stars shone with their same calm light, untouched by the suffering below. The villagers often looked up at them, wondering if the heavens noticed their smallness. There was humility in that thought, a quiet understanding that life is both fragile, shaped by forces far beyond their knowing. And so they continued, day after day, in stillness and in silence, waiting for the world to breathe again. Though fear had settled deeply, something gentler remained beneath it, a quiet faith in time itself, that even the longest night must eventually give way to dawn, and that every silence, no matter how heavy, will one day be broken by the sound of life returning. There came a time when silence no longer meant safety. It meant absence. One by one, cottages that had once glowed with lamplight grew dark. Windows that used to hold laughter now looked out onto empty paths. The village, once so full of ordinary sounds, had begun to hollow itself out. Some families stayed as long as they could. They clung to their homes as if walls and roofs could protect them from what the air carried. But fear, quiet and steady, has a way of eroding even the strongest hearts. Eventually, they left walking down the narrow lanes with only what they could carry, leaving behind fires that burned themselves out. Others never had the chance to leave. Their doors remained closed, their gardens overgrown. The fields that once fed them stood untended, the earth drying under the summer sun. Every path began to blur back into the land, as if the village itself wished to disappear from memory. Take a slow breath. Picture the way it might have looked, the soft, golden light of morning filtering through mist, the faint outline of a cart half buried in weeds, the air still heavy with quiet. Even in its emptiness, there is a strange kind of beauty, the kind that comes when the world forgets to move. Every so often, a traveler would pass through, searching for signs of life. They'd find the silence unsettling, the sound of their own footsteps echoing too clearly, the doors slightly ajar, the smell of dust and rain mixing in the air. They rarely stayed long. The stillness felt too complete, too final. The few who remained behind lived between two worlds, half among the living, half among memories. They spoke to the empty rooms as if someone might still answer. They tended the fires even when no one else was there to feel the warmth. It wasn't madness, just habit, an echo of how things used to be. Inside these forgotten cottages, time moved differently. Cobwebs gathered where laughter once lingered. Bowls sat untouched on tables, dust settling on their rims. The lives that had filled these rooms seemed to hang in the air, caught between what was and what would never be again. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it, the quiet creak of old wood, the sigh of wind through open doors, the faint memory of footsteps in the dust. The kind of sounds that make you unsure whether you're hearing the past or the present. The fields outside were no better. Harvests went uncollected, and the grain fell to the ground, feeding the birds instead of people. Nature, slow and patient, began to reclaim everything. Ivy climbed walls, grass grew through cracks in the stone. Life continued, just differently. As night returned, the emptiness deepened. The sky stretched wide above a sheet of silver stars over a land that had forgotten its own voice. And yet, beneath that silence, something gentle persisted, a feeling that even loss could rest, that even emptiness could become peaceful in time. The roads that once led in and out of the village grew wild. Weeds broke through the packed earth, and rain carved small rivers where cartwheels once turned. Travelers avoided the area, afraid of the stories they'd heard. Over time, even the map makers stopped drawing its name. It was as if the place had quietly slipped out of history. A few belongings remained: a wooden spoon, a cracked jug, a shoe half buried in mud. Small pieces of daily life, left behind without ceremony. They spoke louder than words ever could. Each one a fragment of an interrupted story, evidence that someone once called this place home. The cottages, once full of warmth, began to fold into the ground. Roofs sagged under the weight of rain. Doors hung loose. The beams groaned softly in the wind. What was once built by human hands was now being gently taken apart by the earth that had given it shape. Take a quiet breath. Imagine standing there in the middle of it all. The world still, the sky stretching endless above. The only sound is the wind brushing against stone. There's no fear here now, no movement, no voices. Only time, slow and endless, moving like a tide over everything. The few who dared to return found it unrecognizable. Paths had vanished beneath tall grass. The well had filled with leaves. Even the familiar scent of wood smoke was gone. What they found instead was a calm that felt both comforting and sad. A stillness so complete that it made words unnecessary. Every few moments, let yourself drift with that quiet. The story isn't about what was lost, but about how the world learns to rest after loss. Nature doesn't mourn, it heals. It wraps around what's left and turns it into something new, something peaceful. Seasons continued to pass. The snow softened the ruins, the rain fed the fields, and the summer sun warmed the stones. The earth began to hide what humans had made, as though protecting it. Each year, a little less of the village could be seen, until only the shape of memory remained. The animals returned first, birds nesting in broken beams, deer stepping carefully through fallen gates. The land had no need for permission. it simply resumed its endless rhythm. The same rhythm that had been there before people came, and that would remain long after. By night, the hills glowed faintly under the moon. The outlines of walls became shadows, and the past faded into silence. There was no tragedy left now, only peace, a kind of mercy that time brings when everything else is gone. And so the village slept, beneath layers of soil and grass, beneath the turning of seasons. It rested quietly. What was once full of voices had become part of the landscape itself, not forgotten, not erased, just finally at ease. And above it all, the wind continued to move, carrying whispers of lives once lived, and the soft promise of renewal. When people leave, the land remembers, not in words, but in quiet gestures, the way vines curl around stone, or how wildflowers bloom where gardens once stood. Slowly, patiently, nature began to reclaim what was left behind. The fields that once echoed with voices now moved only with wind and the soft murmur of leaves. Grass grew tall in the lanes where carts once rolled. Moss crept along walls, filling cracks that once held laughter. Trees that had been cut back for generations now stretched freely toward the sky. The rhythm of nature returned, not as revenge, but as restoration. It was as if the earth had been holding its breath and was finally ready to exhale. Rain fell gently through open roofs, feeding the soil inside empty homes. Birds nested in windowsills. Foxes slipped through half-open doors. Life, in its quiet persistence, found a way to fill every space that had once been shaped by human hands. Take a deep breath. Imagine the sound of it all, the whisper of tall grass, the hum of insects, the slow, steady heartbeat of a world healing itself. There is no fear here now, only stillness and growth. The kind of peace that doesn't need to be earned, only observed. Every few minutes, let your thoughts soften the way the landscape softened after years of silence. Nature didn't rush to cover what was left. It took its time, growing slowly, tenderly, with patience that only the earth can understand. The stone walls began to crumble, but they didn't fall completely. They became part of the terrain, half ruin, half hill. In spring, flowers sprouted through them, bright and defiant. In winter, frost traced their outlines like memory made visible. The land was not erasing the village. It was folding it gently into itself. Some who passed by years later would not even realize what they were walking over. They'd see only a peaceful field, unaware of the lives once lived beneath their feet. And yet, the earth held every detail, the warmth of footsteps, the echo of voices, the rhythm of work and rest that had shaped it for centuries. There's a kind of comfort in that thought, that nothing truly disappears, it only changes form. The same soil that once grew wheat now holds wild daisies. The same stones that built walls now shelter roots. It's all still there, just quieter, more patient. By the time the century turned, the village had become part of the countryside itself, a place that existed more in memory than in sight. The people were gone, but their imprint remained, not carved in monuments or books, but in the gentle curve of the land and the calm that settled over it. And as dusk falls again over those rolling hills, the world feels whole in a different way. The silence isn't emptiness anymore, it's balance. The land breathes again, slowly, deeply, as if remembering that life, in all its forms, always finds its way back. As decades passed, the wild began to weave its quiet masterpiece. Roots spread beneath the forgotten paths, pushing stones aside, reshaping what humans had once made straight. What was once the work of hands became the work of rain, wind, and time. Slowly, the scars of labor softened into something beautiful. In spring, bluebells and ferns painted the ground with color. The air shimmered with insects, and the hum of life returned to places where even sound had once been afraid to linger. The ruins were no longer reminders of loss, they had become part of a living landscape, shaped by patience and renewal. Birdsong replaced the rhythm of the hammer and plow. Where once there was the sound of trade and laughter, now came the simple music of the wind through grass. It was different, yes, but not empty. Nature doesn't mourn what came before, it simply continues. Take a slow breath. Imagine that quiet, wide stretch of land, soft greens and golds, clouds drifting gently above, a sense that everything has settled exactly as it should. There's no sorrow here anymore, only stillness, and the peace that comes after long forgetting. Every so often, a shepherd might pass nearby, unaware of the village beneath his feet. His flock would graze where homes once stood. The animals moved easily through the old roads, now hidden beneath layers of earth and grass. Life had made new paths on top of old ones. The seasons folded over each other endlessly. Rain fed the soil, snow covered the fields. The sun returned to dry them again. The village no longer existed as a place, it had become part of a cycle. A quiet reminder that everything made by hands will one day be remade by the earth. Wildflowers grew where graves had once been tended. The boundaries between what was human and what was natural faded completely. There was no longer a difference between past and present, only the gentle hum of existence. Each night, the stars looked down on the hills exactly as they had centuries before. They saw no ruins, no sorrow, only a sleeping land. The silence that once carried fear now held peace, the kind that can only be born from time and acceptance. If you listen carefully, you can still sense it, the quiet dialogue between what was lost and what remains. The land remembers, but it does not ache. It carries history the way the wind carries leaves, lightly, endlessly, without effort, and so the earth endures. Where once stood walls and fires, there is now only grass and moonlight. Where voices once filled the air, there is now a calm that feels almost sacred in its simplicity. Nature has taken over, but not to destroy, only to heal. To remind us that everything, in the end, returns gently home. As years turned into centuries, memory began to fade. The names of those who had lived there were lost first, carried away on the wind. Then the stories followed, the laughter, the work, the voices that once filled the lanes. All that remained were soft hills and quiet fields, a landscape that seemed untouched, but was, in truth, full of forgotten lives. Travelers sometimes passed by without knowing. They might stop to rest in the grass, unaware that beneath them lay the outlines of walls and hearths. The earth had hidden everything so gently that the past felt like a dream. To most, these places were simply fields, nothing more, nothing less. Even the maps grew uncertain. The names of the villages faded from their pages, replaced by open spaces and green marks of land. The world had moved on, busy with new wars, new cities, new stories, and in that movement, the old ones quietly disappeared. Take a slow breath. There's something strangely peaceful about that kind of forgetting. It isn't cruel, it's natural. Time has a way of softening memory until it becomes silence, and in that silence, a different kind of life continues. The land forgets not out of neglect, but out of mercy. Every few minutes, let that thought drift through your mind. How many moments, how many lives have passed unseen beneath our feet. We walk over history every day, over the whispers of people who once dreamed, worked, and rested just as we do. And the world holds them gently, never demanding to be remembered. In the centuries that followed, farmers worked these same lands, never realizing what their plows uncovered. A shard of pottery here, a rusted tool, they're signs of a past too distant to feel real. Each discovery was a question without an answer, a hint of a life once lived and long returned to the earth. When the rains came, they washed over the hills in the same patterns as before, tracing the old paths without knowing it. Nature had memorized the shape of the village, even when people no longer did. The land, in its quiet way, remembered what humans had forgotten. Take another breath. Imagine the peace of it, the endless repetition of seasons, the wind sighing across the grass, the faint murmur of rivers cutting through valleys that once echoed with life. There's a beauty in the balance between remembering and release. Some say that forgetting is a kind of kindness. The past cannot ache if it no longer knows it's gone. In this way, the Great Plague villages found their peace not in survival, but in stillness. The world above moved forward, while beneath, time learned how to sleep. And as twilight falls again over the rolling English countryside, the forgotten villages rest quietly beneath the soil, untouched and untroubled. The earth has claimed them not as loss, but as memory transformed, less patient, and softly breathing beneath the turning sky. Centuries later, when the world had changed beyond recognition, people began to wonder again about the empty fields. Farmers noticed that the ground curved strangely in some places, that the soil turned up small pieces of pottery or bits of bone after the rain. What had once been forgotten began, quietly, to reveal itself. Historians came with careful steps and quiet tools. They brushed away layers of earth with patience, uncovering the faint outlines of homes, the remains of wells, the traces of old roads. What they found wasn't grand, no treasure, no monument, just the small details of ordinary lives. And that, perhaps, was what made it beautiful. They found hearths where families once gathered, fragments of pots that once held bread or soup, and the faint depressions of gardens where vegetables had grown. Each discovery spoke softly, like a whisper across time, saying, "We were here, we lived, we mattered." Take a slow breath. Imagine those hands, careful and deliberate, brushing soil from the edge of a long-buried wall. The air still smells of grass and rain. The sound of wind mixes with the click of tools. Even now, centuries later, the land gives back its secrets gently, as if reluctant to disturb the peace it has built. Every few minutes, let yourself feel that patience. History doesn't rush, it waits to be found. The archaeologists were not rescuing the past, they were listening to it. Each artifact, each piece of earth, was a quiet voice speaking across time. The villagers' names may have been lost, but their presence endured in the simplest things: a cooking pot, a broken tile, a comb carved from bone. Small objects that carried human touch, reminders that behind every ruin there had once been laughter, worry, and warmth. As they studied these remains, the researchers often spoke softly, as if afraid to break the spell of stillness that lingered. Some said the air around those ruins felt different, thicker, more thoughtful, like time itself had slowed to watch them work. When the sun set, the excavations would pause. The fields returned to quiet, the tools laid neatly aside. The archaeologists would leave, but the ruins remained, half revealed beneath the fading light, like the earth was slowly teaching the world how to remember again. In that moment, the forgotten villages became something more than history. They became symbols of endurance, proof that even the smallest lives leave traces, and that time, no matter how long it stretches, cannot erase the mark of human presence completely. And so, as the night returns to those soft hills, the balance between forgetting and remembering continues. The earth sleeps with its memories intact, holding centuries of silence and rediscovery. What was once lost has found a quiet place to rest. Today, the Great Plague villages rest in stillness, but not in total silence. The wind still drifts through their fields, and sometimes the footsteps of visitors return to the same paths once walked by those who lived and worked here centuries ago. They come not to mourn, but to listen, to feel the faint hum of history beneath their feet. The land doesn't speak in words, yet it tells its story clearly. Each rise in the ground, each scatter of stone, is a memory. The curve of an old wall hints at laughter once shared. A dip in the soil marks where water once flowed. There's no monument here, no grand reminder, only the quiet honesty of what remains. Visitors often say the air feels different in these places. It carries a softness, a weight that's hard to explain. Perhaps it's the knowledge that entire lives unfolded here, births, meals, arguments, moments of joy, and then simply faded away. Standing there, surrounded by open space, you can almost feel the presence of time itself. Take a slow breath. Imagine walking through the long grass, the sound of it brushing against your legs, the gentle rhythm of the earth beneath you. The air smells faintly of rain and moss. Somewhere, a bird calls, its echo stretching across the empty valley. The past doesn't feel distant, here it feels layered, close enough to touch. Every few minutes, let your thoughts drift back and forth between now and then. The villagers are gone, but their choices, their work, their endurance, those things remain, woven into the landscape. The hills have become their memory, the wind, their voice. Nothing truly disappears. It only changes form. Some people who visit these ruins bring flowers, placing them quietly among the stones, not as offerings, but as gestures of acknowledgement, a way of saying, "We see you." The flowers wilt, the seasons turn, but the intention remains gentle, human, unspoken. Over time, these places have become part of a collective memory. Schoolchildren learn their names, historians record their stories, and wanderers find comfort in their stillness. The villages are no longer just footnotes in history, they are reflections of how fragile and resilient human life can be. In this quiet remembering, there's no sadness, only peace. The tragedy has long passed, leaving behind something softer, something almost sacred in its calm. The earth holds both sorrow and serenity, side by side, and neither overwhelms the other. Take another breath. Picture the golden light of afternoon falling over the ruins, the way the sun turns everything warm before fading into dusk. There's beauty in that impermanence, in knowing that all things end, but the feeling they leave behind can last forever. And as the evening settles, the land seems to breathe again. The air cools, the grass sways, and the forgotten are remembered not through monuments or names, but through the simple act of presence. Someone stands where they once stood. Someone listens, and for a moment, the distance between centuries disappears. As twilight deepens, the land turns quiet again. The outlines of the old village melt into shadow, and the breeze carries the faint scent of grass and wood. Standing there, you can almost imagine the glow of lanterns that once flickered in these same fields, the soft murmur of families preparing for night. The past lingers, not loud or haunting, but gentle, like the last echo of a fading song. Over time, remembrance has taken many forms. Some write about these places, others paint them, and a few simply visit to feel the air that still holds their stories. There's comfort in knowing that something once lost can be found again, not in ruins, but in reflection. Historians speak of facts, but memory lives in feeling. The shape of the land tells more than any book ever could. The curve of a road, the pattern of the stones, all of it whispers of hands that built, hearts that hoped, and lives that moved quietly through the rhythm of time. Take a long, slow breath. Imagine standing among the remains, listening not for sound, but for silence. It's in that silence that the truth of history rests, not in the noise of events, but in the space between them, the pause, the stillness, the quiet continuation of life even after endings. Every few moments, let that calm fill your thoughts. The forgotten villages remind us that even after change, even after loss, the world continues in quiet balance. The same sun rises, the same wind blows, and the same stars watch over what was, what is, and what will be. Some say that remembering the forgotten isn't about sorrow, it's about gratitude. Gratitude that their existence shaped the earth we now walk upon. Gratitude that time has turned their struggle into peace. Gratitude that their stories, once buried, now rest gently in our awareness. The visitors who come today rarely speak loudly. They walk slowly, letting the silence guide them. Each step feels deliberate, respectful, like entering a room where someone is sleeping. The stillness is complete, but it isn't empty. It's full of presence, full of breath. As the sun sinks below the horizon, the land seems to glow from within. The ruins fade into darkness, but the feeling they leave behind lingers. It's a kind of peace that doesn't depend on words, only on being still enough to notice. Take one more breath, slow and steady. These forgotten places are no longer lost. They live on in the quiet understanding that everything, no matter how small or temporary, leaves its mark. Even silence has memory. Even absence has shape. And when the stars rise high above the hills, they look down on a world both changed and unchanged. The great plague villages sleep now beneath the grass, held by time, remembered by those who still listen. And in that endless quiet, they have finally found what all stories seek in the end: rest. Night has fully settled now. The stars hang low above the hills, their light soft and distant. The air is cool, still, and kind. The fields where the great plague villages once stood lie in silence, wrapped in layers of time and earth. It's a peaceful silence, not the silence of fear, but of rest. The kind that comes after a long story finally finds its ending. If you close your eyes, you might imagine them: the faint glow of cottages long gone, the outline of a path once walked every morning, the sound of water from a forgotten well. Everything that once filled this place has quieted, yet it hasn't vanished. It simply rests, folded gently into the land that now keeps its memory. There's something deeply calming about that thought, that even endings have softness to them, that the world doesn't close its doors abruptly, just exhales. The hills, the wind, the quiet, they all seem to whisper the same thing. Nothing is truly gone. Everything returns, in some way, to peace. Take a slow breath. Let the quiet of this moment settle into you, the way dust settles gently over old stones. The same stillness that covers the forgotten villages now surrounds you too, safe, calm, infinite in its patience. Every few minutes, let your thoughts drift like mist over the fields. You don't need to follow every word or hold on to every image. Just listen to the rhythm of calm, soft, steady, unhurried. The kind of rhythm that lets your body rest and your mind begin to wander toward sleep. Far away, a breeze moves through the grass, carrying the faint scent of rain and soil. The same scent those villagers once knew on days both ordinary and difficult. The same sky stretches above, unchanged, watching over the world with quiet understanding. Sometimes, remembering the past isn't about sadness, it's about gratitude. Gratitude for the resilience of those who lived before us, and gratitude for the stillness they've left behind. These ruins, these hills, remind us that even in endings, there is grace, and as the night deepens, the story slows with it. The fire burns low, its light soft and golden, casting long, sleepy shadows. Somewhere, a single ember glows, like a heartbeat refusing to fade. The story has come to rest, but its warmth remains. Take another breath. Feel the weight of the day begin to lift. The quiet hum of time stretches around you, gentle and infinite. The world feels smaller now, safer, as if the air itself has learned how to cradle you, and in that calm, beneath the stars and the steady rhythm of your breath, you realize history isn't just what happened long ago. It's what remains within us. The ability to endure, to remember, and to find stillness even after great storms. Tonight, that stillness belongs to you. The night stretches long over the quiet hills. The fields, once alive with footsteps and voices, now rest under the calm weight of the stars. Everything feels suspended in time, the air still, the world hushed. It's as if the land itself is breathing slowly, deeply, like a sleeper at peace after centuries of remembering. If you listen closely, there's a kind of rhythm to the silence. The gentle rustle of grass, the soft hum of distant wind. These sounds are the heartbeat of the past, steady, patient, unending. The great plague villagers no longer cry out for attention. They simply exist, content to be part of the earth again. Somewhere, the memory of a candle flickers. The warmth of human life faint, but still present glows, softly beneath the surface of history. It reminds us that even when we leave, something of us remains, in the land, in the air, in the stories that continue to be told. Take a slow breath. The story is almost done now. The world beyond these words has grown quiet. Let that quiet fill your thoughts, your heart, your breath. You don't need to hold on to anything's just rest here in this stillness where time feels kind. Every few moments, allow your mind to drift further. The past and present blur until they become one long exhale, a single peaceful moment that stretches forever. This is what remains when history falls silent, the space between sound and sleep, between memory and peace. The fire has nearly burned out now. Only a few glowing embers remain, pulsing softly in the dark. The warmth fades, but not entirely. It lingers, like a gentle farewell. You can almost hear its last whisper of the story saying, "It's all right to rest now." As the stars turn slowly above, the hills cradle the forgotten villages in silence. Their story, like all stories, becomes part of something larger world that never truly forgets, only learns to rest. In that thought, there is comfort, there is peace. So let the quiet stay with you as you drift toward sleep. Let the hum of history settle in your breath, soft and steady. You've walked through centuries tonight, and now it's time to rest beside them. If you've enjoyed this quiet journey through history, I invite you to subscribe and return next time. There's always another forgotten story waiting for you, another quiet place, in time where the world once whispered softly and then fell still. Next time, we'll travel even further north, across icy seas and fading horizons to uncover another mystery of endurance and silence. We'll ask together, why did the Viking colonies in Greenland vanish? Until then, may your night be calm, your dreams gentle, and your rest deep. Thank you for listening, and good night.